Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of Cut the Crop for this week. And today I have got Vanessa Winning with me, who is the new CE of Irrigation New Zealand. And Vanessa, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Alison.
Yeah. So you've been in the job now for what? About a year, I know. So I thought it would be quite good, maybe if you just start off by just telling us a little bit about your background, and then we can talk about, what you've been doing in the first year and what your plans are for Irrigation New Zealand. So, where have you come from and what have you done before you decided to join Irrigation New Zealand?
My main background, I guess, is banking. I was almost 20 years in a banking environment, ending up in product development, marketing and comms. Toward the end as head of marketing at ANZ for rural, commercial and institutional banking. Left banking and kind of didn't really know what I was going to do. So I went consulting and took on some positions at the Heart Foundation, NZX Agri, some work for AWDT and a couple of other small organisations as well. And then had 5 years at Dairy NZ as a GM for them, ending last year. Went into a COVID response role with MSD and Dairy NZ to try and get some people into the dairy sector. And then out of the blue, I got this call. Long story, long process, and eventually I started last October. So, wide open eyes. We'd been through a couple of years of quite strong, big issues. COVID really hit us hard because we had a massive conference cancelled, and so 2 years of losses. And significant change in the team, and we have been building back slowly and strongly, actually. And when I think about the year, it's been a really significant one for water issues. You can't ignore the situation around Three Waters and water services, but further to that, MPI last week announced a massive structural change in terms of the way that they're looking at water from an availability and also security perspective. And that is a really big deal for us because that work hasn't really been done for quite some time, and it's really needed. And as you're very aware, a lot of our irrigation is used for the growth of crops and food and wine, and I think that's misunderstood. So it's nice to see some developments in that area, and MPI really focused on how do we ensure that we've got water in the right places to make the right decisions, but also to support land use change into more viable hort crops and moving from animal agriculture into other areas really does require reliable water, and it's probably the leading issue for farmers in terms of what are the resources that they need in order to be able to move into different things. And further to that, if we're looking at it from a wider perspective, that water is also used for community drinking water. It's used in community catchments for other, things like water skiing and recreational use as well. And hydroelectricity. And so what we're looking through in terms of the Climate Change Commission report and what's going on there, we really need to be thinking about, well, how do we utilise that water more effectively in a local situation so that we don't lose so much electricity that we generate during the transmission process. And so there's a lot of opportunity I see coming through in this last year in particular around thinking about water in a more strategic way and joining those things up, and so that it's not just water for irrigation on its own for productive use, it's actually irrigation water also being used for other purposes such as community drinking water and localised hydro. So very exciting time to be in the water game, I have to say.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that that the government's starting to think about trying to join, all of this up, because I've been quite critical, over the last 2 or 3 years around our lack of strategic planning around, water. Because I see, water is going to determine the future success of New Zealand's agricultural sector, and I've always felt that we haven't really fully understood the opportunities and risks that can place on us if we don't work it through properly and join the dots and have a sort of an overarching set of policies. So what are you specifically focusing on at the moment? Like, what are the 3 things, that are your number 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, well, so number 1 is definitely in that policy space. There is, as you know, just so much change going on, so many submission requirements coming up. And so really focused on playing where we play, not getting involved in things that are outside of our remit, but really focused in on how do we join all of those things up. So, just thinking about the water space, we're submitting on dam safety regulations, we're submitting on water services, so drinking water, we're submitting on farm environment plans or, environment water issues around that. There is just so much change all at once. And, from a policy perspective, it goes across all of the different government departments, not just, we're not just dealing with MPI and MFE, we're dealing with, DIA and Te Mara Arawai and also MB and also even the Department of Conservation. And so it's really hard, I guess, to keep abreast of all of that. And I really hope our farmers and growers understand that they've got organisations like ours and like others, like yourselves, to do that work for them. So hopefully they're not having to think about it at that level. So that would be, my number 1 is definitely that policy stuff. Secondly, and part of that policy stuff is also making sure that the current government, but also all the other parties as well, really do understand the importance of water, like we're talking about today. And that hasn't been easy. So the second piece is really that perception piece. There is definitely still a view, and it's a very incorrect view, that irrigation leads to more cows. Like, there's just that natural kind of connection, I think, to irrigation equals more cows. And actually, yes, in Canterbury, there were a lot more cows due to the fact that there was available irrigation. But outside of Canterbury, in most places in New Zealand, we don't use irrigation for dairy farming. We use other sources of water. And in fact, if you're thinking about food, probably more water required from a resilience perspective in other industries than there is for dairy farming. And I think we'll really have to change that perception, not because there's anything wrong with using irrigation for dairy farming, but it is stopping some of the decisions being made when it comes to new capture and storage projects, and that there is a very short-sighted process around it. And if I think about things like the Hawke's Bay, for example, Alison, that is not a dairy country place. That's not where you would put dairy cows. It's too hot, mostly. So what is happening there is that there's a fear that could be the issue that comes up, but actually what it's doing is stopping the much needed water for, our crops, for our apples and our pears, for our viticulture, and also just for the community, for the resilience of that community. And so perception is my number 2. The more that we can change that link and also get our urban population to understand, especially that this is a community-wide issue, that irrigation actually is a really useful and needed component of the community. And I think we're getting closer. It is getting easier to have those conversations, but there is still distrust, especially with some of our NGOs around that. And third would definitely be that training space. On average, we've got about 15 people in every one of our courses. We're very lucky to have just had primary ITO support and TEC support under the fees free. That's made a massive difference to the uptake, because it was $3,000 for the 1 week course and $7,000 for the 18-month course. And when that happens, that does make people really question, is this going to be worthwhile? So fees free really will help us develop that next level of irrigation specialists, especially in that design area, which is key to ensuring we're doing things the right way. And then further to that, we do training of farmers on farm, how to use their system, manage their system better. And that has a significant increase in their ability to save water and improve the outputs from that water. So, those are the three things. Definitely that policy government relations is number one at the moment, because there's so much going on. Number two is changing that perception. And number three is really gearing our industry up with training and development.
So I'm interested in the the training component, because obviously we do have a reasonably significant number of arable growers who are using irrigation for their crops. So do you believe that there's quite a lot of optimization that and sort of water use efficiency that can be done over the next sort of couple of years?
Absolutely. Look, I think there's always improvements that can be made. But the more we understand things and the more things change, the more important it is that you keep up to date with the latest activity that's going on and the latest understanding. And you're a scientist yourself, so you know that. And I think what is probably changing is that what we used to do, last year, or the fact that my neighbours turned the irrigation system on, that doesn't mean that we need to. You need to actually understand why you're doing things and what the impact is. And there is more work to be done and definitely more improvement to be made. And hopefully more councils get on board and are mandating that kind of stuff, so that, not only is it because better efficiency of water from their perspective, but also, it really does have a much more positive impact on the farm as well, or the orchard. So, it is a real win-win to have that situation going on. So at the moment, really, it's ECAN that pushes that. We are talking with the Hawke's Bay and also Northland around it as well. Those areas need to be very focused on water efficiency, just as much as storage and capture. So yeah, definitely there's improvements that we can be making.
Yeah, and of course, when you talk about perception and the negative perception, the number of people that will be quite aggrieved if they're driving along the road and it's heavy, it's raining heavily and the irrigation systems are on, and it's just that perception of like wasting water. You don't need to use it. I'm really interested to know what your ideas around trying to change people's negative perception about, something like, a major sort of infrastructure technology like irrigation, because, it's one of the hardest things to be able to do is to try and get, the general layperson, who has developed almost an emotional perception, and to provide them with information that will change that perception that is being based on almost like an emotional sort of, I guess, feeling. So what kind of things are you going to be doing to try and, turn the tide so that people can see irrigation in a more positive light?
Yeah, so I work in a collaborative way with the NGOs. I try and reach out to as many as I can and talk through the issues that we're having and the issues that they're having. And, when you start to listen to what's being said, you actually understand that, at least 90% of what, some of our more invested non-government organisations, such as the likes of the Forest and Birds and the Fish and Games, you'd get to understand that actually 90% of what they're talking about, we're talking about too. And most of what they're wanting to get from an outcome, we're wanting to get from an outcome as well. Sometimes we don't always agree on the how, and often we don't agree on how fast. There's some of the expectations are, that we go faster than is possible. But once you start creating a dialogue, I think you do actually, and you start looking at things that you can work on together, you do actually start to build trust. And I think trust is probably the most important thing of changing perception. When people feel that you're not trying to hoodwink them or change, perception by just telling a story, but you're actually trying to change perception through building trust and listening and having dialogue and conversations and demonstration. And you can demonstrate that you are on a journey and working towards a plan that has outcomes that they're looking for. That's when you start to change perception. You can't just write a story in a magazine or go on radio and have a radio interview and talk about how great you are. You really have to demonstrate it and be in it for the long haul. And yes, there's still going to be some naysayers around, but the more that you can bring people along with you and also learn from them, the more likely you are to build that trust and then from there change that perception. I look at, especially that, if I think about some of the ties with irrigation being negative, there was something in, I'm going to get it wrong, but some land forum piece of work that MFE did, and it had irrigation and fertilizer joined together. Well, actually, that they're not joined together. They're very different things to do. And in fact, organics need irrigation as much as non-organics. Regen cannot be regen agriculture without water. Yeah. So, water is not a fertilizer. It is actually an essential element for life, and be that plant life or our lives or community lives, it doesn't matter. It's essential. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but pushing up and pushing back, it doesn't work. Fighting against doesn't work. Collaborating, working with, talking with, listening, those are the things I think that will get us further along on that journey. And I think also making it less about situations where people profit and actually situations where everyone gains something from the various activities that are going on. And I watch my farmers and growers, and especially my schemes, and they're doing some outstanding work. They're making some massive improvements, but that's a journey. They're still going to be asked to do more. They're still going to have to work out how they can keep working on that. But I think once you start to take those first steps and demonstrate to people that you're on that journey with them, you will build that trust, and I think that will really support the approach that they're doing, and hopefully bring their community along with them as well. And I see a lot of that, and I'm really proud of the farmers and growers that are part of our membership trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, all I can do is support you on this and wish you well, because certainly, from the perspective of the future of arable and diversification into new crops, irrigation is going to be so important. So good luck. And I'd love to get you back in a year's time and see how much progress you've made on your top 3 things.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I'm going to need all the luck I can get, but all the support too.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Vanessa. And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.